All
Stuck in the
right,
sandwich.
here we go. All right, we're gonna try this again. Hey, so welcome back to the show. And yeah, so to recap, our topic is on the duns and the nuns, which we've kind of touched on a little bit previously, but a lot of you may know that this week a study came out from the Pew Research Report or something like that, Pew Research Journal or something, and it revealed a decline. Um, Percentage-wise, not so bad, but I think about 5 or 6 million as far as numbers go of a decline in people who designate themselves as evangelical Christians. And so a lot of people have written articles about it. I wrote a blog about it. People are talking a lot about it online. Different perspectives on whether it's a good thing, whether it's a bad thing. What does it mean? What does it not mean? Why is it happening? And that's one of the downsides to the report. The report does not get into the why people say that they're walking away. And I think that report is actually coming later in the year. They will release
Hmm.
that study. But in the meantime, we're left kind of to speculate and to wonder what's going on with it. And you had just today gone to a conference specifically that dealt with the Duns. And so we thought it made sense to kind of kick off with your reactions to that and what you learned there, what the answers were to that, or at least what was presented at this conference that you attended. So tell us a little about
Okay.
the conference and what you heard.
Yeah, it was conducted. It was actually a group of I would say there was probably about 15 pastors, some staff members um, from the Inland Empire here in Southern California, and it was a more of a workshop discussion um, slash presentation conducted by Wayne Jacobson. He wrote "So You Don't Want to Go to Church Anymore," which was a sort of uh, a book that sort of reignited me in terms of my spiritual pursuit, but also his latest book called Finding Church, which is sort of a taking a look at church from the perspective of what does it mean in light of the reality of our new creation. How does that look? And the topic focused on this idea of duns. It's a phrase that's kind of come into being in the last 5 or 6 months to try and identify a group of people who are leaving churches, institutional churches. They're not laggards or sluggards or the disaffected with Christ. They're people who are frustrated, who feel that institutional church is in some way limiting them or stifling their spiritual growth and their ability to serve. And they're and again, this was part of a study that's been done by, I believe it's sociologist. The study was conducted just recently, and part of the characteristics of these folks are they're the sort of 20% of the church that's actually active.
Hmm.
They're not just the pew sitters. They're the ones that are doing things in the church, and for various and different reasons, they're being disaffected and sort of stepping away from the institutional church. Crap. Seriously?
You're right. What
Are you
happened?
okay?
Yeah, I'm all right. What happened? Did you lose me there for a minute?
it Everything just disappeared. This is like this demon devil thing just entered my computer. All I had to do was say they're stepping away, and boom, it was gone. But anyway, that was the topic of discussion, and so there was the thing started with, so what are you really passionate about? What keeps you up at night?
Mhm.
And we went around and kind of did that. But then it was, so what are the who are these duns? What are the characteristics, and why are they leaving? Why are they disaffected? And it was a fascinating discussion. It really was, because you have a number of people in there who were brave enough to actually enter into that discussion.
Mhm.
Most of the pastors I know don't, have no interest in that kind of a sort of a candid look at what's going on. Wayne said that there's a book coming out called Christian Refugees. It's coming out in a few months, and they've actually got numbers on the number of people that are actually leaving who kind of fall into this category.
Mhm.
And he said it could be up to some of the early numbers that he's seen is 30% of the people that are leaving are in this category. So that's just a huge number, when you sort of look at the overall
Yeah.
perspective, because again, it's not the marginal piece, it's the active piece. And
Right.
so
Right.
with those
Yeah.
people out of there, um, what is the character of our you of our churches become? So
So, what were some of the things that people threw out in the dialogue? I mean, that you appreciated as far as the honesty and the transparency and that kind of level. I mean, what I'm curious because I wasn't there, so I don't know. Like, did they? In other words, like, did some of them admit that? Well, maybe I'm the problem, or maybe it's the way we treat our leaders is the problem, or is it there? We're limiting certain people on certain areas as far as what they can and can't do, or I'm just curious, what was thrown out?
well, it what's interesting is the of the group that was there were several, and again, part of these duns, there are a lot of pastors and ministry leaders and those kinds of folks that are just fed up, um, and sort of have stepped away. And so the discussion first started with, well, if these people are mature people and so they're sort of moving on to something else, well, what does that say about the church? What is the church supposed to be? One of the guys I was sitting with, one of the pastors I was sitting with, just listened to Simon Sinek's
Oh yeah,
podcast on Start With Why.
start with why.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. And I mean, so why are we doing what we're doing? What's the end? And again, when the conversation all revolved back, and Wayne was really candid because he was an ex-pastor himself, um, to the fact that we have an institutional structure that requires that we act like business people.
yep,
Okay. And that's just the flat facts. I'm sitting at a table and with, four other pastors or four pastors, and that's on their thing. One guy said, he said, he's been in the church he's at for the last 18 years. And he said, I've gone through three of these sort of, how did he call it? I think he called it remodel or renovations, and how do we do this and how do we do it better and what can we do? And he said, because I got to the place where it was just killing me.
yeah,
And I just said to my elder board, I said, look, if we don't make some changes, this is going to kill me. And he said, what I was really saying is this is going to kill the church.
yeah,
And yet each of these renovations, when we started unpacking them, they all tried to maintain certain of the institutional prerogatives, um,
right.
that wouldn't allow any fundamental change.
Right. Well, see, exactly, and see, man, for my background and experience in this kind of thing, that's exactly. First of all, none of this is anything new to me. I mean, people have been leaving the church for a long time. Pastors have been burning out for a long time. People who are not the senior pastor, but the other pastors, youth pastor, your associate pastor, children's pastor, etc., missions pastors, etc. Those guys have been burning out or getting frustrated and leaving for a long, 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 long time. And I've also been on staff at churches where they go through what, like you said, these renovations, but typically, like you said, they make cosmetic changes. They typically want, they recognize, oh my gosh, we're losing people. We're losing our leaders. We're losing the people that were like really, involved, excited, energized, vital people, the lifeblood of our church, if you will, and we're losing them. And the kind of changes that typically they try to make to solve the problem is, well, we got to have a better worship leader. We need a better youth program. We need a bigger building. We need new carpet. We need bigger screens. I mean, it's always, and I understand the frustration and I understand the desperation and the urgency of saying, oh my gosh, I got a problem. How do I fix it? But it's like what I experienced was, it seemed like the churches that I was a part of were willing to try anything except what they saw in the book of Acts.
Hmm.
They would buy any book, whatever book just came out from whatever leader, whatever movement, or they would go look at, oh wow, there's some exciting things happening up there in Reading. What are they doing? They're growing. Let's copy them. Oh, Saddleback, they're big, they're growing. Let's copy them. Willow Creek, they're big, they're growing. Let's copy them. And so they would do anything and try anything, no matter how crazy, no matter how disruptive, no matter how far afield from who they were and they knew themselves to be. This is who we are. But let's try it because we're so desperate. We realize this thing is dying. We can't keep all these plates spinning and we can't keep all these balloons in the air the way we're going. And I think that, like I said, the part that frustrated me was such an openness and a willingness to try anything except to read what happened in the book of Acts and say, let's try that. And a lot of times they would even point to the book of Acts and say, I want a church like that. Look what those people had, how they loved each other. They had all things in common. They cared for one another. They loved one another. They were devoted to the apostles' teaching. They met daily and broke bread together in each other's homes. They had all, I want a church like that. But are you willing to do what they did to get what they had? Oh, no, we don't want to do that. It's like I want that result, but I don't want to do what they did to get it or to achieve it. And
Right.
and that's what's frustrating to me is when I see that pattern just repeating over and over again.
Well, and that came up again. There were table discussions and group discussions. In the table discussion, it was one of the guys, like I say, he's been there 17 years, and his thing, we've tried this and tried that, but there, he says, there's just I spend the majority of my time in the administrative part of the church
Mm-hmm.
because there's this that, and I said, well, have you ever considered deconstructing those things? You have a building. Why do you need to buy a building? The
Right.
building sort of presupposes permanence,
Mm-hmm.
and it sort of anticipates either that we maintain the status quo or we grow, because we have to support all of the things that go along with having a building. With what about deconstructing that and getting into a situation where now we can rent facilities that are commensurate with our size and activity?
Yeah.
What about staff? Can you deconstruct the idea of having salaried staff and sort of reconstruct situations where people respond to opportunities as a result of calling?
Right.
That was one of the big topics of discussion, is the idea of obligation. We try and put people under obligation to come every Sunday morning, to tithe, to participate in certain things, because that's what we need for our ministry to grow. And one of the big discussions was, what about, one of the things that these duns are sort of resisting is being the component in a commodity, the component in building someone else's thing.
Yeah.
um, and Wayne told the story about how he tried to coerce, this is my word, not his,
Right.
but leaned heavily into a couple to come and do work in one particular part of their ministry they were involved in, and it fractured the relationship so severely that 20 some years later, when he was at the husband in the couple had died, and it was just the wife and the daughter. He said they were at some kind of an event. I can't remember what it was, but anyway, he finally went up to her and said, I have to say this. He goes, every time I see you, one thing comes to mind. And he says, do you know what it is? And she goes, yeah, that lunch where you tried to. And it was the kind of idea that we, again, and there's pastors that are, their livelihood is connected to the size of their church and the vitality of the church, and the liberalness of God's people.
Yeah.
And you want the people engaged to help build your ministry. And I think that was one of the sort of aha moments in that, is again that institutional possessiveness that says you're here and you're here for life,
Mm-hmm.
and you're a lifetime giver, and you're a lifetime contributor, and it, and some people are, it wasn't about, or this was an and thing.
Right.
And there are some people that's not how God's calling, but we have this institutional possessiveness that can't release people to go follow God's path for them,
Right.
you know um, and so there was a lot of discussion about that, but there's an the it's a frightening thing, and you could see it just in the discussion. It's a frightening thing to consider deconstructing that institutional structure that provides a certain amount of comfort. you know
Oh yeah.
if we could just get it right, this will all work,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
And and people are walking away because it's not right. I mean, not right in the sense of the organic activity that's required to keep life in something.
Yeah.
Um, and Wayne and I talked at one of the breaks. It's that, and we've talked about this too, is that in this situation, in the main, what we're doing, instead of equipping saints for the work of ministry, we're training an audience to respond to a performance.
Yes. Yep.
And
It's a
then
sermon and a
we're
song.
all,
Yeah.
yeah. And I said, I'm not, it's not that I don't enjoy those moments, but if I'm going to do a concert, I want to do a good one.
Right.
And Wayne said, yeah, and I don't need to do one every Sunday.
Right.
Okay. So it's that performance component of things where the few do the work and the many listen.
Right. You're creating a
Um,
spectator environment, and then once you successfully have created a really great spectator environment where you're, like you said, you're doing a concert every week, and maybe you're doing it and you're really great at it. Let's say you succeed on that
mhm,
level. You're doing a great performance every Sunday. You're knocking it out of the park every Sunday. Everybody loves your performances, but they're all really great spectators. And now, as a pastor, you want to motivate those same people who you've trained to be great spectators to get out of their seat and go out there and start living it and start sharing their faith and getting to know their neighbors and listening to God's call and walk it out. And they all say, "What are you talking about? You just trained us on how to be the best spectators we could possibly be." And now you're trying to undo that. And it's so like you're even what you're trying to accomplish is at odds with itself.
exactly. And that came out. And that was one
Good.
of the things on this topic, or one of the things in terms of obligation. Okay, is and there were a couple of guys said, how do I motivate that 80%? Well, you've built a structure to demotivate them
Yes.
from being active.
So
Okay, what you,
yeah, take that apart first. Get rid of
right?
that.
Instead of getting people in an exercise program, you've taught them to be couch potatoes,
Right.
and and now you're
Yep.
all saying, "Wow, that's not healthy for the church. You need to get up and get active." And you go, "Well, wait a minute. I thought that's what we were all about,
Right.
couches."
Yes.
Um, and so that was part of the discussion as well. And one of the things I appreciated about Wayne is that the whole idea of obligation, he says I think that's just one of the most horrible words. And linked to that was responsibility, because the topic was, and again, it all goes back to that institutional thing of how do we keep people here and keep them engaged. Well, if we can put them under guilt, under obligation, okay, if you don't, then nasty things happen to you, or if we try and tell them this is your responsibility. Um, well, and his response was, what you drain out of that is passion. What you drain out of that is desire.
Mhm.
I said, one of the things that he was told when he was a young pastor was, by an aged Scottish something or other, whatever he said, was that, he said, when your kids are 13, don't require them to go to church. Now, you done the pastor thing. I mean, the pastor, his wife, and his kids, if they're not front row center and singing all the hymns,
Mhm.
that reflects on your ministry.
Right.
So, and his thing was this, the counsel was this, is that you want your kids to desire to be there and do,
Right.
not be there and do because they're under obligation or guilt or fear or any of those kinds of things. And he says what we've done is we've drained that out of people, beyond, again, going to see, to be event driven.
Yeah.
I go, hey, the pastor's just awesome. He's an awesome speaker. I get 25 minutes of him in the morning. I get 15 or 20 minutes worth of, the sing along worship thing. Um, hey, I'm good to go. I mean, and then we wonder why there's no impact in the world.
Right. Well, yeah.
Then we wonder why, our churches have the same divorce rates and drug rates and immorality rates and everything as the world at large, because basically our faith has been relegated to that hour and a half on Sunday morning. And so there was this, it was a very good discussion, because you could see that those topics opened that reflective side of people, where they're sort of assessing their own churches and their own, the participation of folks in their group and how their thing is structured. There was one younger pastor next to me that was just, I mean, you could tell he was just being blown away.
Mm.
It was things that he was trying to, and again, the difficulty is, to your point, is how do you take these new ideas that have the attraction of vitality in life, and then get them twisted around, bent over, and put back down into that institutional box that constitutes my livelihood as well as what I consider to be my calling.
Yep.
And one of the pieces and the dilemma in that was one of the things Wayne brought out, and I think I'm quoting this correctly. There was a study done of pastors who were, he said, if you were given the opportunity to make the money you're making now doing something else, how many would you do it?
And most of
And
them would.
yeah, it was like 90 some percent would
Hmm.
walk away.
Yep.
And I think that's the done piece. Now, not all of them are in that, in the paid staff thing. They may be just participants, but it's just like, you know what? There's nothing that I'm doing here that I can't do on my own or with others in a non-institutional
Right.
setting.
Right.
And so I think the sort of takeaway from this, and there were a whole bunch of really neat things, discuss the thing. Well, one thing I personally appreciated, because this has always been for my wife and I sort of one of those, moments.
Hmm.
It's thing we ask, are you a Christian? Somebody
Hmm.
says yes. Thing we ask each other is, where do you go to church?
Yep.
That's the most question we can ask, because if I say, well, I go to First Baptist, then you know who I am.
Yeah.
And if I say, well, I'm from the Vineyard, well, you know who I am. Or if I'm, and it's not true. You don't know who I am.
Right.
And what we do is we disconnect the relational piece of our conversation, because we've already presumed that we know that person and what they're all about.
Oh yeah.
And I think that was, again, one of those aha moments, in that, because one of the things he said, that I wrote down, I thought it was just really neat, is the conversation should be about what brings greater unity. He says questions like those don't bring greater unity.
No.
They introduce the component of division.
Yeah.
And he said the church should be about that greater unity. John 17, that they may be one. And so, what are we doing in terms of the sort of cultural components that we're encouraging, um, that create greater unity,
Yeah.
rather than um, sequester people? Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. 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 Yeah.
It's like, okay, you're part of my group, or you're part of our group, or this is our group,
Yeah.
and we're not like that other group. We're better than the other group.
Yeah.
Not there. He said one thing I thought was really good. He says there's nobody that identifies with a group that doesn't consider their group superior to all the other groups.
Right.
you know
Well, it's
and
funny.
and he
Yeah, it
goes,
reminds me of we did a thing every Christmas. Our house church group goes and sings at a senior home that's right down the street from us here, and we go room to room, knock on the door, and just sing Christmas carols to people and ask them if they want prayer for anything. And it's always awesome. We love doing it because it's one of the few times that, because it's Christmas, you can knock on the door and say, "Can I sing some songs
mm-hmm,
about Jesus?" And they'll say yes, because any other time they'll be like, "Get out of here." So we were doing that. We were going door to door. We are knocking on the rooms and going in and singing to people and praying with them and stuff. And it was great. And we came into this one room and it was two guys and knocked on the door. And I said, "Hey, do you mind if we sing some Christmas carols?" And he goes, "Oh no, that's okay." But then he goes, "But what church are you guys from?" And I said, "Well, we're all, you know, we're Christians who meet in different homes here around Orange County. What's the name of your church?" "Well, some people I call it the mission. Other people just call it house church or whatever." "Well, what do you guys believe? You want to know what's your doctrines?"
mm-hmm,
He's looking to label us. Like he's trying so hard to figure out who, like you said, because if I say we're Baptist, oh well, now I know who you are. If I say we're a vineyard, oh, now I got you pegged. But so I'm just kind of, and I can't. I'm not being evasive. I'm just trying to answer his question in a way that's accurate, because we don't really fit any of those things. So he says, "What do you guys believe?" I go, "Well, we believe the Bible. We follow Jesus." Well, everybody says that. Everyone thinks they're following Jesus. What do you believe? I go, well, I don't know. If you ask me what I believe, I can tell you what I believe. But you could ask this person, and they might agree, but they might be, agree on some things and not on others. And he
Hmm.
was getting really, really frustrated with us. And so he said, "So what? You're just the miscellaneous Christians of Orange County?" And we all laughed. And one of the ladies in our group said, "Yeah, that's right. We're the miscellaneous Christians of Orange County." And I like that name. I kind of like that because it does make it more about. In other words, you can't just, if I can label you, I can marginalize you. But if I can't
Correct.
label you, well then you're forced to talk to me. You're forced to ask me, what do I believe and why do I believe it? And we can have a dialogue. We can have a
Right.
conversation versus just I'm done with you. You're one of those people, and you're either with me or you're
Exactly.
against me, and I like you or I don't like you, and now I can move on.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the interesting pieces in the discussion is about the willingness to embrace and celebrate
Yeah,
others.
yeah,
Okay, and the importance of establishing that relational connection rather than trying, like you say, to marginalize or distance yourself from as a result of difference.
hmm,
Because what we share in common is much greater than whatever difference we might have about doctrine or structure or methodology or modality or whatever you want.
yeah,
We share Christ. I mean,
yes,
that's huge,
yes,
right?
yeah,
And so I think that was again watching the reactions, um, the uh, the willingness to consider the idea that people are in a journey. um, I think on our table, the thing of let's start with why we're here. And one of the things I posed, I said, I know it's probably really frightening to think about this, especially when you're removing product from your product line.
hmm,
But if you go back to that Simon Sinek thing that says, okay, so why are we here? What's at the core of what we do?
right,
And because we had a discussion about what if churches in an area shared ministry with one another on the basis of what they were really good at,
yeah,
right? Rather than offering this huge menu of, you know, 65 dishes that you can choose from, because what we want to do is make sure we get something on the menu for everybody.
right,
Then there's a reason for them to come and be with us.
right,
Um, Rather than understanding what our calling is as a group, as a community,
yeah,
and really leaning into that and doing it well, doing it excellently. And I sort of, because this one guy was seemed to be inclined to that kind of reading, I said, if you've read Seth Godin's book Tribes,
yeah,
I said that's basically the bottom line of it. He's no spiritual, giant, but I think he has the core of it, and that is, if you're true to your calling, what you're really passionate about, word gets out, others are attracted to that, they contribute to that, and others are attracted to that, and the thing grows to the level that it grows.
right,
There's such an obsession, again, because I think of the financial component of things, there's such an obsession to get that threshold number of people in the building, giving liberally, and staying in the building, you know, instead of saying, what is it you want us to do? Does that take 10? Does it take 20? Does it take 100? You know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And that kind of thing. So I think that piece was in there in that discussion as well as sort of an eye opener.
yeah,
Um, and I think the other, um, it was so interesting because things like, well, what about authority? These duns. I mean, whose authority are they under?
yeah. That's
You
that's
know,
always a big question because if they're not under mine, then I want to know who's they're under.
Yeah, because that's the structure, right? We
Right,
have some people at the top, and Wayne brought in the whole idea of the bishops in the second and third century that became the arbitrator of what was truth and what was heresy, and
right,
and who could do what, and all of those things. And the discussion came around to, well, uh, he said, I know the people in my life that that in my broken moments I go to. And it doesn't mean my pastor necessarily, or, or people didn't come to me because I was the pastor.
Right.
We go to the people that we've established relationship with,
Right.
which was really fascinating because when we went around the table talking about how many real friends do you have in the church? You're the pastor of the church. How many real friends do you have in the church? Oh, two or three.
Yep.
Okay, so I'm supposed to bring my brokenness to you. I don't even know you. You
Right.
know what I mean? I know the Sunday you. You know what I mean?
Right.
I know the ministry you, but I don't know you. You don't know me.
Right.
And so that piece came out as well as, again, sort of that reinforcement of the relational necessity. And then I think the final piece, that was the component in this, again, because that and it was so interesting, the guy that brought up the thing with the or with the authority thing, did the, sort of upper and lower
Oh
deal.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And he
Yeah.
goes, oh, maybe I got to be careful with how I talk about things. And he, because that is the authoritative relational piece.
Right. Yeah. And
There's the
and
one
again,
that knows and the one that needs to learn.
yeah, and I think that is one of the disconnects as well in that traditional model is that idea of authority and what you were touching on, the difference between authority and accountability. And I don't mean accountability in the way maybe some of the ways we've talked about it. I mean it in the sense of that, well, exactly like Wayne was saying. Like for me, um, our house church went through a phase where people were questioning whose spiritual covering was our church under. And we realized after I spoke to several people that were mentors in my life, and I honestly just asked them, for their feedback. Hey, is this real? Do I need some kind of spiritual, like, accountability or authority or covering, this spiritual covering specifically? And every one of them, and by the way, most of those guys were traditional church guys, and every one of them came back to me and said, "No, spiritual covering is just a code word for control, and that what we don't need is covering. That idea of
Hmm.
that authority of someone's over you, the spiritual authority that's above you, kind of keeping you in line, because first of all, that doesn't work. It really doesn't work. But what does work is relationship. So if I have a relational accountability with you, and you're my friend and you're my
Exactly.
brother, and I know you and you know me, and I love you and you love me, and our families know each other, and we're in relationship with each other. Now, if I speak to you about something in your life, that matters. You care. It has
Right.
weight. It carries weight, a real weight, not a false authority title, a weight. Because, like I said, honestly, that means nothing. And
Right.
and there are people in my life that they're not my pastors. I don't. I mean, I really don't have a pastor. Uh, there are people in my life, and you're one of them. But there's other people that I'm accountable to spiritually, right? That either I would go to you for advice, I would go to you for insight, I would go to you and ask you for prayer, and so I know who those people are. And in that
Yeah.
sense, those people, quote unquote, have authority, but it's not their having authority over me as much as it is my submission to them in those moments when I need wisdom, when I need prayer, when I need insight. I humble myself and come to them. John Zen's, who I love, a good friend, John Zen says that authority in the church, in the New Testament church, is not something you demand, it's something you grant.
Hmm.
And that's and when it's done properly, I grant authority to you or to others in my life out of love, out of humility, because I know I need to be in a place where I'm beneath, I'm submitted to the authority of Christ in you. It's not you, it's
Hmm.
the authority of Christ in you. And so I think when that's done properly, then none of that other stuff matters. Who cares who's got the title? That really
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Well, and that was one of the, again, and I'm not being trying to be judgmental in anything. I hope there's not that it doesn't come across in the way I'm phrasing things, but one of the extensions of that was, well, these duns, well, one of the guys says, well, I respect Wayne, I respect you, and then Alan Eiler's the guy that sort of coordinates all these. But anyway, um, he said, I respect Alan because he's mature and stuff. But what about these younger people that say they're done with church, and they're you know not done. And the thing was, well, and sort of the underpinning and what came out in the conversation is,
You there? I think I might have lost you. Dan, come back. Hello, hello. Oh, we're going to try and reconnect here. Sorry, everybody. We're going to give it another shot here. Come on, Dan. Come in, Dan. What was going on? We don't know. Oh, boy. Well, everyone, I'm sorry. I apologize for the disruption. We were trucking along pretty good there. Okay, so I may not be able to get Dan back on the line here. If I can't do that, well, going once, going twice. Well, darn. Let's try it again. Well, everyone, I apologize if you're watching this. We were disconnected. Dan, you there? I can't. Hello. Hey. Did I get you back?
yeah. Have you ever noticed that every time we talk about this topic, we have,
Yeah. Was it the topic we were talking
yes,
about last
are you
time?
there?
Yeah, yeah. Is this the topic we were talking about last time we got disconnected?
It was.
That's funny.
Absolutely.
That is weird.
Absolutely. Every time.
That is weird.
Anyway,
So you were about to talk
but
about the guy.
just
One of the guys said something about the Duns, and he didn't respect the younger ones who are not really done or something.
right. Well, the question was, how do we keep them from making a mistake? Because they're really not done. They're just this, that, or the other. And the thing came back to, and again, it's that institutional assumption that we know what's better, and what's better is for you to be here. And the point Wayne made, what I thought was just really excellent, is um, again, that goes back to that authority and
Yep.
control piece,
Yep.
right? Rather than, what about us just being there for each other? And I'm there for you, and that's what you feel, how God's leading you. He gave the illustration of his daughter who was on a campus, and um, she wasn't really doing much. I guess she was going to some intervarsity anyway. The came up to her and said, "Listen, are you, the daughter of the pastor?" Da 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 da. And she said, "Well, yeah." And she goes, "Well, I'm a Christian too, and I'm drinking and I'm sleeping around, I'm doing drugs and stuff like that. And I notice you're not doing any of that." She goes, "No, I don't." And he goes, "Well, can you help me? Can
Wow.
can we just get together? Can we talk?" And she goes, "Well, what do you mean?" And so she was a reluctant participant with this gal, right? And it so happened that they got together in her dorm room and stuff. And by the end of the semester, there were like 30 girls in the dorm room, um, talking about living for Jesus there on the campus.
Wow.
And InterVarsity found out about that, and they wanted to get her into the leadership thing. And she said, "What do you think, Dad?" And he's saying, you know, you sure? This could not. And she said, "Well, I really believe God's calling me to that." And he said, "You know what? Then I'll be standing with you, and I'm available anytime you want to talk." Da 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 da. And it turned out badly, because there's a component of what they do that she felt was guilt based,
Yeah.
and she didn't want any part of that.
Yep.
And so halfway through the thing, it was really going badly, and they had sort of circulated some rumors about her on the campus, and she called her dad and said, "So what do I do?" He goes, "Well, just leave." And she goes, "But I can't." And he goes, "You know what, dear?" He says, "Disengaging from a ministry is like disengaging from a boyfriend. It
Yep.
only takes one vote.
Yep.
You don't know, okay? You don't have to get a quorum.
That's
If
right.
you decide it's not for you, then walk away."
Yep.
And she did. Well, he used that as an illustration, as that we want, from that. And again, this is sort of a human thing too, especially if you care for people. You want to jump in and save them.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
and 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 his whole thing was, what if the church was more like when he learned to be a pilot? He got his pilot's license at 17. And he said the way that happened is he went down to the airport, and he was going to take lessons. So he sat in the plane with his instructor. And the instructor says, "So what do you want to do?" And Wayne said, "Well, I want to learn how to fly a plane." And he goes, "Okay." And he just sat there. The instructor just sat there. And so Wayne's looking at him. He goes, "Well, so what do we do?" He
Yeah.
goes, "Well, what do you want to do?" And he goes, "Well, I
I
guess
want
I
to
want
fly
to
a
start the
plane.
motor." Yeah. He goes, "Well, I guess I want to start the engine." And he goes, "No good pilot ever starts by starting the engine. The first thing we do is we do uh, 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 the check of the aircraft to
Right.
make sure that it's ready to go before." He goes, "Okay." And so the instructor just sat there. And he said, "So can you show me how to do that?" And he goes, "Sure, I'd be glad to show you how to do that." And so they jumped out. And he said that the lesson, and the instructor explained the methodology, was this. He says, "I want you to own this aircraft. I want you to own this experience. If I just tell you what to do and then you parrot it, then you may or may not own that knowledge.
That's
Okay,
great.
you may just, be superficial." And he said, "What if the churches was about, instead of people parroting, or people um, faking it till they make it,
Yep.
what if we were there to help people own that experience of their journey with Jesus?"
That's beautiful.
And so, yes, I'm you know what? Let's talk about it. Here's my input. Da 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 da. If you feel that what God wants for you, then I'm standing here for you, and I will be with you in that journey. And anytime you want to talk or pray or whatever, I'm there for you. And I thought that was such an amazing thing, and it's so contrary to that sort of institutional presentational approach to, quote, discipleship. And that was one of the other topics that one of the other guys brought up, is that where's this, and he really an insightful guy, thoughtful guy, talking about, so we've got this missional piece, and we got this spiritual development piece, and we got this. How do all of those pieces flow together? How do all of those components connect? Because we have this seeker model that doesn't stress spiritual development. It doesn't stress the missional piece where I'm involved in mission,
Yeah.
and I get engaged and I'm out. And one of the things Wayne was saying is, if we emphasize more the idea of equipping people. Think of all the missionaries we send out into the workplace every time they go to work on Sunday morning, or out into the campuses when they go to school, or into the neighborhoods. Or we have all of these people that are vitally engaged with Jesus, living that life, experiencing the reality of that new creation, and effectively communicating that. He
Yes.
said, if you think about it, Jesus made the decision to go to lunch with Nicodemus rather than speak to the crowds that had assembled. I
Yeah.
think it was Nicodemus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. He went to lunch with Nicodemus rather than get 5,000 people in the hippodrome, and bring in the worship band,
Oh
and
yeah.
do a sermon.
Oh yeah.
And he said, what was the result of that? Well, a whole bunch of people got their money back, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the community was affected positively by that moment. But he went on to recount the other things, and he said that was one of the things that affected him mightily, when he left. Of course, he had a very bad experience in his church thing. But one of the things of sort of disconnecting to the institutional piece of this was, when he realized that he was spending more time in the administration part than having lunch with the Nicodemuses,
Yep.
you know, establishing those relationships. So I think at the end of the day, you have all of these sort of components working together. And I think that the overwhelming sort of response in things was, okay, so how does this work?
Yep.
You know, and one of the things I totally appreciated about Wayne was this. He said, and I told him, I said, you know what I love about what you're doing, Wayne, is you don't have a model. You know, they're not books and tapes on the back table that outline the model of how you live out this thing. It's about our individual journeys and the many faceted um, representation of the church. You know, how God is manifesting himself through the world in all these various different ways. And you got the home churches and this and that and the other thing. And at the heart of it is, do we see Jesus? You know, or
Yeah.
do we see sort of an institutional um, entity, okay, that has a religious connotation to it? And so I just thought those were just really, you know, kind of powerful. It was just a very powerful time, um, without having any answers at the end, other than you just need to go back and fall on your knees and ask God to lead you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
great. And I think, I do see value in that. In the, if nothing else, that you get a chance to have those kind of conversations with pastors, and you get to ask those kinds of questions, get them to ask those kind of questions, and introduce the concepts to them, even if right now they're not ready to fully embrace it. At least you planted the seed of that idea in their minds. And I know a lot of people, a lot of pastors, who have made that decision uh, themselves to say, you know what, this I'm willing to. Neil Cole has a great thing where he talks about speaking to traditional pastors. He tells them, if you want your church to change, you want it to grow, you want it to be like a first century church. He says the step one is your church has to die. Your church needs to
Hmm.
die, and he encourages them to even actually have a funeral service and to start over from scratch, and not start over from scratch in a traditional model, but start over from scratch in a first century model of church, where to the pastor really that's the biggest sacrifice. um, you're going to have to lay aside a lot of the assumptions you have about who you are in this thing and how much of a role you play in this thing. But to really
Right.
start letting go of a lot of that, you're laying all that down and giving it away to Jesus and to the people who make up this church. That the church is the people. The church isn't you. The church isn't your denominational brand. The church isn't your doctrine. The church isn't the building. The church are those people. So let's start focusing on that. And how much of a role do they have to play in this thing? How invested could they even be in this if it isn't even about them and their connection to each other and to Christ as the head.
Yeah.
And so it's a great idea. Although I'm very pessimistic, I'm just a pessimist. A pessimist is an
Right.
optimist with experience, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
I look at that and I agree. I say yes, that's true. I'm just very skeptical about how many pastors will actually try that and do that and follow through with it and stick with it, even if they start it, the process. But secondly, you know, how many will even do it? Most of them will, I think, will just say, never mind. Um,
Yeah. And again, we share this sort of viewpoint on things. Um, and I think it's a legitimate, I think it's a realistic perception of the effect that these kinds of discussions have on the institutional church. I think it's just like anything. It's just like when people talk about politics.
mm,
Why is it that both parties end up, my feeling about politics, it's the same boot, it's just different feet.
yep.
There's the left foot and the right foot, and you're
Yep.
still using a boot.
That's right.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, and part of it is because there is very little motivation to change what enriches you personally.
Hmm.
As long as I can maintain power, position, and accumulate wealth, why do I want to make big radical changes in the way that we approach how we govern? The
Right.
same thing I think is true in the church. I think until the point where um, there's an advantage to doing something different, people do the same thing. And right now, because we don't have persecution, because we are not having to make a decision. Again, I told you I'm reading the Pilgrim Church, and it's just century after century after century of people, if they say no to the institutional church, regardless of what flavor it was, it costs them their life or their lands or both.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, and so the decision to affirm my relationship with Jesus had significant tangible consequences. Um, until that is part and parcel of our society, I don't think there's a significant, in the main, in the sort of macro look at things. I don't think there's a motivation to change things radically.
Yeah.
I think there's more of, like you were talking about, let's try this program, let's alter this deal, let's change the service times, do you know what I mean? Let's mix it up, let's do this. Um, but are we really fulfilling the Great Commission? Are we really making disciples? And I
No.
think that was, again, one of the things that Wayne emphasized that was truly significant is again, we may be creating pew sitters,
Yep.
okay, but even that pew study says the attraction to that is waning,
Yep.
you know, and people are leaving. But are we even having any impact on um, on making true disciples of Jesus? And his thing was he finally got to the point where he understood that the real significance of his life and ministry was helping to equip people that were passionate about serving Christ.
Yeah.
He said we spend so much time trying to motivate people who have no real desire. They've sort of fulfilled their religious obligation in their mind, and they're satisfied with that in terms of their dance card.
Yes.
Um, and he said, I finally came to realize I need to spend the time with the people that are really engaged,
Yes.
you know, and whatever giftedness or whatever contribution I can make to their life, that's the piece that has eternal significance.
Amen.
Um, and that's not to say you reject all the others, but the conversation is different. The conversation is different.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
I just, I agree with you. I don't think it's going to make a huge dent, but I guess my feeling is in the participation in those kinds of things, if one guy walked out of there going, you know what, regardless of what it costs me, this is what I want to be involved in.
Yeah. Amen.
I want to be a catalyst for authentic communities, of Jesus followers. And if that means
Hmm.
I walk away, I walk away. If that means I walk forward, I walk forward. If it, whatever it means, that's what I'm committed to. I
Yeah.
think if that comes about, then the whole time's been worth it.
Amen. And I think that's what it's all about. I think that's the best you can hope for. Is if even one person came home after that and went in and closed the door and got on their knees and said, Jesus, whatever it takes, let's do it. And
Yeah,
and just said, let's do it. And just followed whatever the Holy Spirit told them to do next, no matter how radical or scary or counterintuitive it might seem to them. That's the best you could hope for. And I pray that at least one person does that, then
absolutely.
um, but see, that's the end of the tail to me on that study that came out this week about the people that are leaving the church, because I think that what they're actually measuring in part when they're measuring on that study, you know, whatever 8% decline in evangelical church growth, or people self-identifying as evangelical Christians. I think what they're measuring in part are Christians who have said, "I'm not going to play the evangelical church game anymore, so I'm leaving that." And 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 I know that the organic church, the house church movement is growing. I see it all the time. I know it's a movement of the Holy Spirit, and I know that people are doing that all the time. And so I think that's part of what's being measured there. And I lost him again.
Are we
Dan,
back? Are
yeah,
we back again?
yeah.
The devil is just having a field day.
What is it with this topic? I don't get it.
You know what? It it happens every time now. I think it's happened two or three times, and every time it's been along this topic. I personally, I think it is a spiritual,
Yeah.
it's a spiritual warfare about this kind of thing because I think to your point, what it does is that this is about activating God's people.
Hmm.
You know, I think the devil would be absolutely completely satisfied with everybody going and sitting in a pew for an hour and a half every Sunday morning if the whole nation did that,
Oh, yeah.
as long as all they did was sat in a pew.
Well, of course. Yeah. Then,
You know,
yeah, absolutely. I have to send you something. I'll have
so
to send you a link. There's a great article written by a guy named Brant Hansen that I won't go into it on this, but I'll have to send it to you because it deals with spiritually that whole idea of how to neutralize the church by just really getting them to be really great spectators.
yep, I agree.
All
So
right. Well, while we're still
so
connected, I
anyway,
guess we should wrap it up before we get disconnected again.
that's true. Appreciate it. Thank you for waiting the day and giving me the opportunity to go to that thing. I just I think it just wove right into what we were talking about, and again back and forth
Awesome.
on that Pew survey, and we'll see what that church refugee books has to say about what the numbers are and how people are engaging outside of that institutional environment.
Right.
So,
Exactly. All right.
hey, Lord bless you.
All right, man. God bless. Talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Bye bye. And thank you for listening. Thanks for hanging in there with us. Uh, Hopefully next time it'll be a little better.